Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sickle Speaks. I'm Natalie,
I'm Vinkata.
And I'm Kaylin.
and we are your hosts for this episode.
In today's episode, we'll be discussing fact versus fiction on the Salem witch trials.
Yes. Well, first, we need to know what the Salem witch trials are. So,
The infamous Salem witch trials. It started with a group of girls in Salem Village, Massachusetts.
Village. What the heck is a village, bro?
Village.
Continue.
Salem Village, Massachusetts, and they claimed to be possessed, and they started accusing of other local women of being witches, and they eventually got
Killed?
killed.
Yeah. A part of the Salem witch trials, there is a lot of misinformation about it, and I feel like no one really knows what it was, so.
Part of it is media, because there's so many movies and so much stuff going around about the Salem witch trials that isn't entirely true.
Hocus Pocus does not very fully describe how they were.
No. Also, other movies, Agatha All Along and WandaVision and stuff like that. They take witches and they depict it as evil magic stuff, when in reality I feel like witches were kind of trying to be peace, and they were trying to
They were just trying to practice their own things, and
they were just
know.
trying to have their own kind of religion, their own traditions, and people, especially in a time where women weren't.
It was in the 1600s.
Yeah, so women were automatically not as in
They
power.
didn't have as many
they
rights.
didn't have as much power. So I think that part of it, in my opinion, might be that the men were getting upset that their wives were starting to separate from them, and we're starting to get separate from society, and that
be independent
and do their own things, form their own religions, and
because usually the women are supposed to serve the
men.
men.
But the women decided to serve themselves, and that got them in a lot of trouble, and I think that that's really messed up.
A biggest thing in the Salem witch trials is that a lot of people believe that the witches were satanic, which is not entirely true, because according to Britannica, witches don't practice Satanism necessarily. It could be a combination of many different things. They could just be spiritual people looking for a spiritual awakening, or people practicing herbology and trying to make potions that might benefit people.
Well, yeah, because also when you think of witches, you think of magic and
you
wizard stuff.
You think of a green lady with a big hat riding a broom, and that's just, in reality, that's just not how it is. That's not.
And they don't perform magic or whatever. They don't perform spells on people. It's mostly just beliefs of what they have.
Imagine being in Salem in the 16th century and seeing a woman flying in the air on a broom in the middle of the night. I would be pretty
do that in
scared if I saw that
2024. I don't think that they would be able to do that in the 1600s.
Yeah.
So.
And Britannica also said that they the witches, they would transform from humans to animals, and otherwise they can almost shapeshift. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think that people were hallucinating. I think that that's called hallucination.
Yeah, that actually ties in with some of the stuff that was going on at the time.
Yeah.
People had misinformation going on, and there were things for example, they would be a big part of the economy back in the day was rye, and people would get an illness from rye, and they would start hallucinating.
I think that the Salem witch trials ultimately was just rumors.
Yeah,
I think that
was.
And I think it's really unfortunate, but it did bring up a lot of empowerment for women. I feel like that's been a lot. Because for the first time, women were finally able to do something for themselves, because it was mostly women. I mean, I think that there is probably still men who were involved with the Salem witch trials. Okay, so since we just talked about the fiction of the Salem witch trials, now we have to say what was actually true about the Salem witch trials and the reality of it. So, Kaylin, you can go first.
So a lot of the majority of people, they would say that 70 or 85% were just women, like, and that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And 20 to 25% of them were actually men who were accused of being witches or wizards.
No, would they be a witch or a wizard?
No, it would not be a witch because a witch is a female thing.
Yeah, but like wizards are like, I don't know. I feel
Avada Kedavra.
Bro, they were finding Horcruxes everywhere back in the 16th,
The
1600s.
Ravenclaw's diadem.
That also kind of brings me to my next point, is that a lot of people say that witches praise the devil. They're satanic.
That's not true.
But that's not true, because at the heart of the Salem witch trials was, I guess, the devil, which doesn't exist in Wicca, which was their pagan religion, which was based on nature.
Yeah,
and
like
not
in like the herbs,
like their
and the herbs and stuff.
their I guess paganism was based off nature and not worshiping the devil. Like,
yeah, because usually the witches, they were all like very like spiritual, and
they were,
it
yeah,
was not like, we said that before, didn't we?
yeah,
Like,
they
it
were
was-
very spiritual. It was about finding their own spiritual peace, because
And it wasn't like casting spells. It wasn't like doing any seances.
they would say, I guess, quote unquote, casting spells, but it wasn't like that. It was more of,
yeah, it wasn't like any sort of seances. It wasn't any sort of like
No.
Satanism.
no, they weren't trying to cast
You weren't
the
drawing-
devilish spirit. They were just trying to find peace in a time where Christianity was really strict.
Yeah, like
because
you wouldn't go into one of their houses and find a pentagram on the floor
yeah,
with candles surrounding it.
The problem with Boston at the time was it wasn't just Christianity. There was so much tension between the Christians and the Puritans of the area.
yeah,
And most of the women accused were in the areas of Puritans who like just believed that witches were the sole reason of all their problems.
yeah,
And the trial system was so rooted in their Puritan culture, and which was like mostly male dominated, which made it so hard for women to like become free of the title witch.
yeah.
So in reality, the courts at the time didn't really rely on material evidence, but rather like spectral evidence. According to Webster's dictionary, spectral evidence is the type of legal testimony where the witness claims to have seen a vision or a dream of the accused person's spirit or apparition, which, I mean, if you think about it, like, which poses a whole new question, like, are people seeing spirits? Like, why would they think that if there was, like, a spirit around that it would be because of a witch? Like, there's so many holes in all the evidence that was presented in the trials, which is part of the reason why it was never really fair to begin with. Like, again, like, if someone said, you're a witch, you're just a witch. Especially if you're a woman.
There was no, like, what you're saying was there was
Wait, so
no
what were the-
hearing out the women. It was just
Yeah,
like,
but what was the trial about? Because usually trials are about hearing them out and like hearing their defense.
I think
See, that's the problem with the trials back then. They were so unfair. Like, the legal system itself was so unfair. They didn't really care about whether it was real or not. They
yeah.
just...
So it was basically, I'm guessing it was just a hearing where it's just like a bunch of people in town just gathered together and
tried to hear their defense, but they didn't matter.
like it didn't matter. So
You have to remember, like, the judges were old men. I mean, everyone at the time thought they were doing the right thing by rooting out the witches. Like, if you get rid of the witches, you get rid of the problem, which is not
Yeah,
essentially
that's not true because if you would go and accuse every single person of being a witch, you're eventually not going to have anybody left.
yeah.
And it's all going to be men. And then what are you going to do? How are you going to reproduce?
I mean, no, that's true though.
Like they need to have their like children. They need to have like other things, and you can't just go to another town.
That was another thing, is that if women couldn't bore children, if they couldn't
they would
produce, they would be considered as useless and like
Yeah.
nothing, like they're like scrap, because that's also how they would be considered a witch, is that men would get so upset that they wouldn't produce a kid, that they would consider them a witch.
Now that we've talked about the fact and the fiction of the Salem witch trials, let's talk about the impact of the Salem witch trials. Natalie?
All right. Well, for starters, so much of the tragedy of the Salem witch trials comes down to the failure of the court and the laws at the time. I mean, laws made things such as visions, dreams, and even like testimony of spirits, evidence that you're a witch. And a court that accepted accusations, so flimsy, they would be like laughable today. Like if you saw what they were deciding for these women and some men, I think that you would laugh because
Yeah, you would like lose trust.
like there's no like real evidence. It's like, oh, you had a dream, you're a witch. Like you had a bad dream, you're a witch, and that's just not.
Yeah, like we said, like the court system was just so horrible at the time.
And I think
at least now they're taking steps to like
yeah, so that's a lot of the impact is that now court systems are more based on evidence and they won't just be biased, because that was a lot of it. It was really biased back then. It was just men against women, and in a time period like that, it
Mostly
was
the men would have won.
So when you think about the Salem witch trials, especially us teenagers, we often find it fascinating because it represents a dramatic story, like of witches, women against power, the abuse of power, and within a historical context, it feels so distant, but also like strangely relatable because of the themes of like social pressure, fear, or like accusations, like you stole something or you're a witch. If someone said that to you, it would be very relatable. So while the trials provide a captivating narrative with elements of like supernatural and mystery, it also helps to know that the trials themselves were unfair and unjust, which can help us become a better society overall.